let's get started. So, Narayan, let me ask you just a couple of brief questions to begin with, and then we can involve the physical audience here as well as the virtual audience on Facebook and have a to and fro. It's too abstract to ask you about the state of the Indian economy, what's happening in Modi's India. I think the more pertinent question for Sri Lankans is, what opportunities can Sri Lanka take from what's happening in India now? Are the fears justified of India overwhelming Sri Lanka, business overwhelming Sri Lanka becoming some sort of satellite state? Or is it the other way around? Is there, as the Chinese say, big win-win solutions out there?
Razeen and everybody, thanks for this great opportunity. You know, it's the first time I am on a virtual platform, so it's very excited about it. And yeah, to answer your question, are there opportunities for growth between India and Sri Lanka? Sure, they are. And why do I say this? Is Indian business going to overwhelm Sri Lanka? I don't think so, because in a way India is big, the businesses are big, the internal market is growing, so it is looking for products and partnerships from Sri Lanka which would help it to develop its own internal market. Let me give you a few examples. I've been talking about many Sri Lankan firms which are exporting into India, especially the southern parts of India, and which are doing extremely well there. I've also been saying that some of the firms are changing the standards that Indian companies are producing. I mean, I keep mentioning this, but for example, chicken sausages. Chicken sausages from Sri Lanka are absolutely the rage in southern part, especially in Kerala. And the quality of Indian chicken sausages has improved enormously because of Sri Lankan arrivals there. So I see only opportunities of trade between the two. And I don't see that Indian companies will come and swallow, because the size of export of Indian companies, the larger companies, requires markets which are substantially larger, and they would like to use Sri Lanka maybe as a manufacturing opportunity, which is good for Sri Lanka, rather than overwhelm Sri Lanka with their own products. I don't see it happening at all. Going forward, I see this country at a 4%, 5% growth rate can do so much better. A 7 to 8% growth rate is certainly possible here. And if that happens, then most certainly there's an opportunity both for export as well as import of products.
Now you're a Tamil, you live in Chennai, you worked in the Tamil Nadu state government, and then of course in the union government in Delhi. The best connection presumably commercially is between Sri Lanka and not necessarily all of India, that's a continent unto itself, but the 4 or 5 now South Indian states. So tell us a little bit about what opportunities are out there for Sri Lankan firms in South India. And of course South India itself is not uniform. Give us a sense of that.
You know, there's a lot of historical, emotional, political, family connections with Tamil Nadu. A lot of people here visit Tamil Nadu, personal, for tourism purposes. But Tamil Nadu is not all South India. States like Kerala, Andhra, now Telangana, Karnataka. These are states where businesses are growing fast, the economy is growing rapidly, and these are very different from each other. To give an example, Kerala is a consuming state. It gets its money from remittances. There's a lot of wealth that has been created here. It has the highest social indicators. In many ways, it's very similar to Sri Lanka. But all the consumption goods in Kerala come from outside. Even fruits and vegetables and even basic stuff comes from outside. And that's an opportunity, because instead of Kerala getting apples from Himachal, which is 2,500 kilometers away, I mean, they should be getting products from Sri Lanka, like strawberries, which are already going there, and could be many other fruits which could easily go there. If you move to somewhere else like Andhra, then you have a different story. Because Andhra is developing its ports so as to feed the inner part of India. And if you look at the large central part of India, like Madhya Pradesh, like Raipur, I mean, they are underserved. And if the ports in the eastern part of the country develop with these linkages, then garments, refrigerators, electrical machinery from Sri Lanka could well go to these areas. So you need to segment the Indian market, not just look at Tamil Nadu alone, because there are opportunities outside Tamil Nadu. Now here I must say that the closeness to Tamil Nadu will not go away. The largest number of flights from Colombo are to Chennai. The largest number of traffic from both ways in terms of tourist traffic is from Chennai. That will continue. But if you're looking at businesses, it's important that you start looking at places outside Tamil Nadu.
Okay. Now we're on Facebook, and this is Advocata. So we're with a crowd that's generally quite a bit younger than we are, let's put it that way. And of course, many of them are tech savvy and are also involved in IT and in startups and so on. So what about, I mean, this is a question about cutting edge services. People are familiar with the Bangalore story and the Hyderabad story. Some of it is of course happening in Chennai itself. What are the opportunities for Sri Lankan tech and startups to serve the Indian market in IT services?
I'll give you here a kind of a personal narrative. I have with me since last year, since about 7 or 8 months ago, a group of young people who just passed out of college, local college, about all 20, 21-year-old youngsters, tech-savvy youngsters. And what they got interested in is to create AR and VR platforms for helping businesses. To give an example, let's say there's a large a wind turbine which needs to be fixed, which need to be maintained. And if you these guys are able to put a sensor there, which then feeds back into their AR goggles, where you are able to see what is inside the turbine, and then the service instructor can tell them what needs to be fixed. And this is being done by 8 or 9 people. Now they got some other order in Dubai to fix boilers, and these are being done by 8 or 9 youngsters on the ground floor of my office. And over the last 8 or 9 months, they have made it into a business. I've supported them, but now they are flying on their own. And these are these are technologies which are available to you as much as to them. So I am sure there's a great opportunity for Sri Lankan youngsters to participate, to grow on their own, as well as to collaborate with these kind of youngsters. And there are thousands of youngsters like this in India, in Bangalore, in Hyderabad, and in Chennai. Not all succeed in the startup space. Maybe out of 10, if 2 or 3 make it, it's great. But okay, that's where the challenge is.
Now we were, before coming here, we were chatting about, we were saying there's a gap in the Indian market which the Sri Lankan IT services industry can exploit, because the big IT companies, Infosys and Tata, are so busy with government work that especially smaller companies now can't get their job done. Perhaps you'd care to.
Yeah, this is over the last year, last few months, I would say. India introduced GST in July, and GST requires a lot of filing of returns, of making sure you're getting the input credit, and everything is online. Income tax has increasingly become online. Now the big companies, the Infosys, the Wipros and the Tata, they are handling big government work. Also entire, I would say, driving licenses and vehicle registrations have gone online. So they are employing hundreds, maybe thousands of people handling this. In fact, government is not even happy, and it's keep telling Infosys, you're not employing enough people for the GST. So, but for the ordinary businessman, I mean, even if I have to file a GST for my little company, I have to run to somebody to figure out the software and to file it online. And people are not available because everybody is busy with big work. Small firms are all blocked up. There's such an opportunity for a small software firm, a small accounting firm, a small, I would say, tax filing firm to do work virtually for the smaller and medium Indian companies. And this could be done right out of here. All that you need to do is put out your availability out into the media to say, okay, we can do this kind of work, and I'm sure work will come your way.
Okay, let's bring the audience in, both physically and virtually. Starting with physically, does anyone have a question for Dr. Narayan? Don't feel shy. Subhashini, over to you.
I just wanted to ask, when people are talking about the competition from India, it is really not about professionals coming into Sri Lanka. And actually, even in the IT field, whether it's medicine, the fear is actually from the professional sectors that it will obviously, we all know imports are good for consumers, whether it's professionals or goods. But from the professional side, there is severe protest against allowing Indian professionals to come into Sri Lanka. And there is this fear, especially the price, the cost of services is going to go down to an extent that, it is going to be it will affect, obviously, the income levels that they're earning. And there are lots of serious questions also about the quality of professionals in India not being uniform. That it's most likely the third tier or the fourth tier of professionals would be the ones who would come to Sri Lanka, whereas everybody else will go to West. So there is huge concerns about Sri Lanka's regulatory system. So would like to know your views about these fears.
I think at the back of the mind, you're probably talking about medical services, because People going to the West, I don't think the accounting services people, or you're not talking about the taxation or the auditors. You're talking about medical services. I have 2 or 3 thoughts here. Thought number 1 is, okay, let us say your fears are justified. It is possible to ring fence this. How can you ring fence it? You can ring fence it by insisting that whatever service agreement you enter into with India, you will specify the kind of institutions from which these people should come. Singapore does that already. Everybody is not recognized. If you come from the top 20, 30, 40 institutions, okay, then you permit them to come in. Number 2, much more importantly, if you are able to bring in an investment criteria to say, okay, they can't fly in, fly out, they should come and set up an establishment here with a minimum number of amount of money that they should invest here for their establishment. And much more importantly, they should employ X number of Sri Lankans, whether as assistants, whether as technicians, or whether merely as sort of helping like nursing staff. And in which case you can have a win-win, because one person coming in, putting the money, is going to provide so much more employment and so much more opportunity. And as far as the pricing is concerned, as a consumer you should be happy that why would you want to be paying artificially high prices just because there's a shortage? Rather, you should be welcoming an equalization of prices. And I don't think it actually happens. Actually, it happens is that the guy will come in and start charging Sri Lankan prices. He would like to take more money away rather than less money away.
Suppose there's a bigger question associated with that. Now we have some Indian companies that are in Sri Lanka. Some of them do minimal value addition, a few do more substantial value addition. You mentioned the example of one company that makes fruit juices out of concentrate here and exports to the Indian market. Should we be thinking on a much bigger scale about Indian companies coming into Sri Lanka and adding substantially more value? What kind of sectors, what kind of companies, and what kind of platform would they use Sri Lanka for?
No, I am increasingly arguing in different places that the story about each place becoming a total manufacturing location is probably getting to be over very quickly. It's not that from buttons to garments to collars need to be made in any one place. I'm increasingly saying that it is important that each country, each state, each location becomes a value additional location. If buttons can be made in Bangladesh for shirts to be stitched in Sri Lanka, for collars to be made out of Honduras or whatever it is, and finally the end product is a shirt which will be marketed. So I think it's very important to look at the value addition chain and see where Sri Lanka can fit in. For example, the garment industry, a lot of fabric comes to Sri Lanka from India and from other places also. Gets converted into garments here, probably goes back into India or probably goes into a third country, another country. So there is value addition at the fabric level, value addition at the stitching level, value addition at the final marketing level. The way to encourage this is, at the moment, there is a quota on garments export from Sri Lanka to India, is to push this ceiling to make sure that you get a better opportunity there. So, and I think this is true on the IT side as well. IT finally ends up into a product, and that product could be anywhere in the world. A product could be finally used in India, finally used anywhere else. The idea for the IT, the software could come from India. The development, the design could happen here. The product fabrication could happen in let's say, even Taiwan. So I think you need to start thinking about the next stage and say, where am I going to be in the value chain? What is going to be my distinctive advantage? And it is not necessarily going to be manufactured from A to Z.
And indeed is much more likely to be some sort of service
Absolutely.
offer. Okay, back to the audience. Who's next?
My question is, in terms of demographics, Sri Lanka has an aging population, while India's has a more younger generation. I guess over 65% is under 35. How do you think the two neighboring countries can, match this and, go forward in terms of trade? How can we, be more competitive? I mean, use this to our advantage for the two countries.
Actually, the large number, as you know, is a bit of a worry. It's a bit of a worry because, the number of people that you need to find livelihoods and employment is so horrendously large that I don't think even in India we have an answer that every year 10 to 15 million people are entering the labor market. I mean, what is the kind of livelihoods that they are going to be provided? I think in Sri Lanka you have an advantage that you have gone beyond that level. In terms of education, in terms of basic livelihood and living standards. So you are entering I would say, the employment or the livelihood market, if I use a loose word, at a substantially different level. So in a way, you are not competing with the entry-level people of the 65% that you are talking about. So you have a distinct advantage, and that advantage will remain right through.
Anyone else?
Hi, so in terms of the IT industry in India, I just want to know, like, okay, in the US, they say any product, when you want to test it, you go to Peoria, Illinois. That's where all the like in the US, there is a city or a county that they say multinationals go to test a product. It's called Peoria, Illinois. That's the city. And in India, is there any particular city that you would recommend or has like a focus group generally if you're entering the market in the IT sector?
IT products, okay, that means I'm talking about manufactured products arising out of IT concepts and IT designs. If I were to look at 2 or 3 locations, I would look at Hyderabad and Bangalore. As the places where ideas get converted into real products. That products need not actually be made there. Could be made in the US, could be made in China, made in Taiwan, etc. But not just a call center or not just I would say a virtual situation of managing banks or whatever it is. But in terms of the product-based IT, I would talk about this. But other places are coming up, like Pune is coming up. Pune.
Have another.
Any other takers from the audience over there?
A quick question on the financial sector. Sri Lanka is trying to become a hub for South Asia, and a part of that is the Colombo International Financial Center, or as we call it, Port City, where we're trying to build, hopefully, a world-class city for South Asia. Can you hear me?
Speak up a little bit, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sri Lanka is trying to be a hub for South Asia. And in the financial sector, we're trying to pitch in terms of the Colombo International Financial Center, or Port City, as we call it. I was wondering, a part of getting this right is really getting India right and seeing what market opportunities lie within India and how we can tap that. What are your thoughts on this?
Did you manage to get
I got some parts of it, not all of it. So, in fact, this was a matter we discussed yesterday. I also agree with you. I think Colombo particularly has a great opportunity of becoming a financial hub like Singapore and Dubai, because it is open to all the foreign banks, and your currency is broadly tradable. It's an open currency. But I was told that at the moment, the allocation of international financial resources to Colombo, to Ceylon, it's Sri Lanka, is very small. Therefore, the financial market here is still too small. We were in this position maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, before the financial sector opened up. Today we have an extremely robust financial market. But this is something that Sri Lanka needs to develop, and I personally think there's a great opportunity, and certainly all the firms south of Mumbai would easily want to access Colombo as an opportunity for their financial needs. But actually this is in Sri Lanka hands.
One other question, Narayan. Now, a lot of the political controversy about Indo-Lanka relations revolves around the FTA and the current Oetker negotiations. There are business groups, professional associations here that are very resistant to further opening. And at the same time, there are those who peddle an argument that this is a way of India invading and overwhelming Sri Lanka. So my question to you is, how should Sri Lanka approach the Oetker negotiations? What kind of agreement would be a good one? And how can these sensitive defensive issues be tackled?
No, I do think that in these negotiations, which have been going on for many, many years, a lot of time is being used up in looking at tariff lines of hundreds of items. You know, there are total 8,000 items in a tariff line. I think between Sri Lanka and India, the relevant tariff lines can be brought down to something which is less than 1,000. So step one would be to concentrate on this. Step two would be to granulate this and say where are the opportunities larger and bring it down even further. Step three would be to look at what are the bottlenecks. The bottlenecks are tariff, or the bottlenecks are non-tariff barriers. And if there are non-tariff barriers like port clearances, non-tariff barriers like I would say approvals from regulatory agencies, then the negotiation should focus on clearing those barriers to the advantage of both the countries. I mean, I have spoken elaborately about this, about what can be done.
Okay. In the public lecture you gave yesterday, you talked a little bit about Indian cultural power or soft power, and that Mr. Modi is using this very much as part of his foreign policy arsenal. What does that mean in concrete terms, and how is it relevant to Sri Lanka?
I think in foreign policy history, India has had cycles. If you recall, when Mr. Nehru was the Prime Minister, he was the architect of what was called the non-aligned movement. And that was a normative ideology which was relevant for about 10 years between the 1950s and the 60s. And after that, the different blocks emerged. There was no particular attraction for non-alignment, and that got frittered away. So if India has to come to the center stage of foreign relations engagement, what Mr. Modi is trying to do is to say that there is something more in India, and that is culture. The cultural affinity between India and Southeast Asia, India and Sri Lanka, India and Africa, India and Mauritius extends much more than the issue of non-alignment. It is to do with people. It is to do with religion. It is to do with culture. It is to do with common habits, common food. And that is why when recently the stadium was inaugurated, it was immediately followed by a large yoga session. And now yoga has become a major plank of conveying Indian culture to different parts of the world.
We have a question online in two parts. Firstly, what is Modinomics? And secondly, Modi is good at branding his policies. What can we learn from that?
Modinomics is the name that all of us, particularly in the media, are trying to give to whatever he is doing. But basically, what is he doing? What he is trying to do is to put India on the center stage in terms of a few things. In terms of self-reliance in manufacture, in terms of the importance of reaching out through foreign relations to all countries, not just to the US and to Australia and Japan, but also to Russia and China. And finally, internally, looking at things which have never been done before. For example, a Clean India campaign. For example, providing electricity to all villages, providing cooking gas to even the poorest people, removing subsidies. These are all part of what is loosely called Modinomics.
And the branding question. The Modi phenomenon is very much about branding India. What can Sri Lanka learn from that?
I think you should have a message. And this is a conversation we had earlier. What does Sri Lanka want to become? Does it want to become a manufacturing hub? Does it want to become a transportation and a logistics hub? Does it want to become a technology hub? 10 years later, 15 years later, what should Sri Lanka be known for? And that's where the branding comes in.
Well, any further questions from over here before we close? Okay, we have one more. Again, this is a kind of soft power question. What needs to happen culturally to make Oetker work?
Culturally, I would say very importantly, India-Sri Lanka relations have suffered from a lack of trust. There have been periods when India has neglected Sri Lanka. There have been periods when Sri Lanka has been cold towards India. I think it is very important to recognize that in many ways, India and Sri Lanka are so closely linked with each other, and especially in an area which Razeen pointed out yesterday, in terms of democratic institutions, in terms of democracy and the power of the people. So I would say much more cultural exchanges, much more exchanges between think tanks, much more exchanges between, I would call it even yesterday I was watching a program which showed important Buddhist places in the world and starts off with Sri Lanka, goes into India and then goes off into Cambodia, etc. These kind of linkages should develop further.
Okay. Well, we've covered a very wide range of issues about Indo-Lanka relations. Let me thank Dr. Narayan here for thinking on his feet and responding to my questions and all of yours. And I think my important takeaway from our discussion is that we should be much more optimistic about Indo-Lanka relations, the opportunities out there for both countries, for Sri Lanka to take advantage of all these profound changes that are taking place in India, most of them for the better, and that these far outweigh any disadvantages that might exist, that are much exaggerated among some quarters here in Sri Lanka. So that's the end of our Facebook Live session with Dr. Narayan for Advocata Institute. Thank you very much, all of you here, and for all of you watching online.